Need some new Zendikar Rising cards? You can get them today from our sponsor, Card Kingdom. Just head over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and today we're talking standard bannings. We have another BNR coming out tomorrow. It is already happening. We are 2 days after the release of Zendikar Rising, 2 days after the rotation of Standard, and we're already getting Standard banning. So I thought this would be a good time to look back on our past 4 years of Standard bannings, going back to January of 2017, when Emrakul and Reflector Mage and Smuggler's Copter were banned, and kind of look at the bannings that have happened in the format, look at why the cards were banned, and then also look at whether or not the bannings actually, improved or fixed the format. Does Standard bannings even matter? Do they help anything? Do they fix anything? So we're going to go back through the last 4 years, where we've had plenty of bannings to talk about, and kind of dig into it and see, should we have hope that tomorrow, when Wizards releases a BNR announcement, that everything's going to get fixed, everything's going to be awesome, everything in Standard is suddenly going to come perfect? What do past bannings have to tell us about what might happen tomorrow with the BNR? That's our plan for today, along with a little history lesson about bannings in Standard. So first off, after having one round of bannings in 2004 to target affinity stuff from Mirrodin Block, and then another in 2011 to target Cawblade in the World Wake era, the next banning we had in Standard was January 2017. January 2017, we got rid of Emrakul the Promised End, Smuggler's Copter, and Reflector Mage. So this was a few months after Kaladesh released. So these three cards got banned. Why were these cards banned? And apart from the fact that they were very pushed, Emrakul was intentionally pushed. Wizards wanted Emrakul to be the biggest, baddest threat in Standard, and it went a little bit too far. Smuggler's Copter was omnipresent, seeing play in over 50% of it. Just every creature deck was playing Smuggler's Copter. Wizards probably pushed it a bit too far, but the biggest reason I think for these bannings is something that still comes up today. There just weren't answers in the format, and we still see this argument today when bannings come up, and when we talk about them in Standard, you still see a lot of people saying, well, we need better answers. We need better answers. And I think that was definitely true in January 2017. There was literally no Graveyard Hate. There was no Tormod Crypt or anything even slightly comparable to fight against Emrakul's. A Braid wouldn't come out till a few sets later to fight against Smuggler's Copter, and Wizards presumably intentionally kept good answers to these cards out of the format so they would see play. So even though I don't think the answer argument holds up today in 2020, back then that was really a huge issue. If we had Graveyard Hate, if we had a Braid, would Smuggler's Copter and Emrakul have been banned? Maybe, but I think it's much less likely that they would be banned. So did these bannings fix the format? And the answer is sort of. So after these bannings, we went to a meta where Mardu Vehicles, Felidar Guardian combo, and Aetherworks Marvel energy combo were the clear best decks in the format. And a deck to mention here is the Mardu Vehicles deck. That was a deck that never really got targeted with a banning. I guess technically Smuggler's Copter is a Mardu Vehicles card, but really Smuggler's Copter was just in every deck. But Mardu Vehicles kind of made it through unscathed, even though at times it was up to 30-40% of the meta. But really, the big issue was Felidar Guardian, Aetherworks Marvel. Those were the cards still hanging out in the format. So was the format fixed by these bannings? It was improved, but I wouldn't say it was fixed, because we got another round of bannings in April with Felidar Guardian. And Felidar Guardian, this one is really tough. The easiest thing to do is just write it off as a mistake, where Wizards left off some of the safety valves that are usually on this card, rather than returning the permanent at the end of turn, like Flicker Wisp. It came back in right of play. It didn't have any restrictions to just creatures, which made for this really easy combo with Saheeli Rai, which is why the deck ended up getting banned. The most notable thing about this banning is Wizards actually didn't ban it at first. This was back when we still had scheduled BNR announcements. So we would know every 3 months or whatever, there would be a BNR. If something was going to change, it was going to be that. So we had a scheduled BNR announcement in April. Everyone and their mothers and their fathers and their grandparents knew that Felidar Guardian would be banned. It was the whole community just was coalesced around it being banned. It was obvious, it was clear. So we get the BNR announcement, and it was a no changes to Felidar Guardian BNR announcement. It didn't actually get banned. Then the roof went off. Everyone freaked out, like hardcore freaked out. One of the best Magic freakouts in a while. And there's nothing like a good Magic social media / Reddit freakout. So everyone freaked out. And then 2 days later, Wizard posted an addendum to the BNR announcement saying, okay, actually, Felidar Guardian was banned. They posted this lengthy thing about how they wanted to see if the meta developed more with a new set releasing and metagame percentages. But really, it was a tough sell to convince people that the data somehow changed so much in 2 days that you went from thinking Felidar Guardian was okay to thinking it wasn't. So it was probably the overwhelming freakout from the community that made it happen. So what happened next? Was Standard fixed? And the answer here is no, not really. I mean, we went from Felidar Guardian combo being super annoying into a very energy-dominated meta. Aetherworks Marvel became the top deck. We had blue-red control with Dynavote Tower. We had mid-range energy decks. We had electrostatic pummeler aggro energy decks. We still had Mardu Vehicles floating underneath the surface, being a tier deck. Zombies for a short while after Amonkhet broke out. So the meta, it improved. There was no longer Splinter Twin in Standard, where if you didn't have removal, you were just dead on turn 4. But it's not like the meta was super, super awesomely great, especially with Aetherworks Marvel, which is our next ban. June 2017, Aetherworks Marvel meets its end out of the format, and this ban is very notable for one big reason, which is the reason of the banning. If you read the announcement of this banning, Wizards was very clear they didn't think that Aetherworks Marvel needed to be banned. They actually pretty much straight up said, like, it has bad matchups, we don't think it needs to be banned, but the data isn't the only thing we look at. And we've talked to pros, we've talked to players, people hate playing against this card. It's very demoralizing. It feels like nothing you do matters when your opponent just spins an Ulamog on turn 4. So we're going to ban it, even though, in our opinion, the data doesn't say it needs to be banned. So that was essentially the BNR announcement. So Wizards didn't really want to ban it, but the community kind of forced their hand to some extent, which I think was probably a good thing in hindsight. So what happened next here? And essentially we were waiting for rotation. It's June, July, August, September. We're 3 months away for rotation. The metagame is still energy fueled. That is still the best thing going on, especially mid-range energy decks. Yes, you can't accidentally spin an Ulamog on turn 4 anymore, but energy was still so good that it was the best deck in the format. So we're waiting for rotation to see if the release of Ixalan and cards leaving the format would shake things up. Would that fix the problem? And the answer was no. So energy went through rotation, and it actually just became more and more played, starting off at like 20% of the meta right after rotation, going up to 30, even higher in certain events. So January 2018, a few months after the release of Ixalan and before the winter set, Wizards like, all right, we're finally going to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of Attune with Aether. We're going to get rid of Rogue Refiner, which will essentially kill the energy decks. And then for good measure, because even though these decks might not be too dominant right now, they probably will be post-energy banning. We're going to get rid of Ramen Up Ruins, Rampaging Ferocidon as well. So this happened in January of 2018. Why did it happen? As I said, energy was already the best deck pre-rotation, and it was immediately the best deck post-rotation. So our hopes and dreams of rotation fixing our problems were expertly crushed by energy, and it just kept getting in better and better, creeping up higher and higher in the win percentages, in the metagame ranking. So something had to happen. So what happened after this banning? And I have to say, this was the one banning that actually did work. After we got energy out of the format, we had a great period of peace in Standard. Yes, over the next 18 months, there were Teferis and Curious Obsessions and Nexus, so it's not like there were never annoying cards, but we didn't have any bannings. Dominaria was super well received. The meta was overall in a pretty healthy place for the next year and a half, which I think kind of lured people into a false sense of security. So when we had all these energy bannings, which we've been talking about, the initial feeling was Kaladesh was a mistake. It was an artifact set, which traditionally artifact sets are some of the sets that Wizards messes up most with, going back to like Urza's block, going back to Mirrodin. There's always mass bannings. New Phyrexia with the Callblade banning. So artifact-based sets historically have led to a lot of bannings. Plus, we had this new mechanic resource system and energy that you couldn't end up with. So at this point, after the last round of energy bannings, with no bannings happening for 18 months and Standard actually being really hyped and exciting with Dominaria, I think that everyone, myself included, started to think of, okay, like things are back to normal now. We had a rough go of it, one of the roughest goes of it in Standard that we've had in a long time, but it was pretty much all Felidar fault. Wizards did what Wizards does with artifact blocks. They go a little too far. There was a new mechanic with vehicles. They pushed it too far. Energy was probably a mistake. You couldn't interact with it. So as the months went by, with no bannings and a fairly healthy Standard, we started to think that, okay, things are back to normal. Like, Standard is good again. Kaladesh, yes, it was a disaster, but it was a blip on the radar. It was an outlier. It wasn't a sign that things were bad in Standard. It would remain bad. It was just an overpowered set. And that happens on occasion. It's happened historically. No big deal. We'll move forward. Standard's going to be great now. And for the next 18 months, that was mostly true. Not that Standard was greatest of all time, but it was relatively solid, relatively diverse. But then, 18 months later, we're kind of back to where we started again. And in the meantime, over those 18 months, there are a couple important things to mention. One of them is War of the Spark released with a very ambitious Planeswalker static ability, tons of Planeswalkers. Even though the set itself didn't lead to a ton of bannings, it definitely changed Magic, and it was a big sign of arguably the risks that Wizards was willing to take. Putting almost 40 Planeswalkers in a set, putting static abilities on Planeswalkers, the risks that Wizards would take to innovate and do something new. Secondly, in that same time frame, we got London Mulligans, which is beyond the scope of this video, but there is an argument to be made that London Mulligans is at least partly responsible for what we're going to talk about next. So our next banning, October 2019, Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead made a ton of zombies. It did it really easily. And essentially what happened here is we had rotation last year. This is only a year ago now, Throne of Eldraine. And immediately after rotation, we went into a 2-deck meta. It was Field of the Dead Golos Ramp versus Oko Food. So those two decks were essentially the entire meta. We knew that one of them had to go. They were ruining tournaments. People were frustrated not playing Standard. It was not fun. So we knew that something had to change. Wizard made the choice that Wizards normally makes, which is to ban the older and lower rarity card. You need the Face Walker from Throne of Eldraine to sell the set. You can't get rid of Oko, so we get rid of Field of the Dead. And what happened next is we went from a 2-deck meta, where you could play Field of the Dead or Oko, to a 1-deck meta, in all honesty. And that might sound like an exaggeration, but we really got to the point where Oko was 70% of Mythic Championships, which is just historically broken. Like, we've never seen anything like that before. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something in like the early Dark Ages of Magic in the 90s, but at least in the modern era of Magic, there has never been a Standard as broken or a card as dominant as Oko, which, of course, after doing another tournament, Wizards finally was like, all right, we got to do something. Yes, we'd probably rather wait a little bit, try to sell some more Throne of Eldraine, but this is so bad, we can't do anything about it. We printed the most broken Planeswalker of all time, already in the best color combination in Standard. So in November 2019, after Oktoberfest, after Oko was 70% of a Mythic Championship with unprecedented dominance, Wizards banned Oko, Once Upon a Time, Veil of Summer, mostly all targeted at the Simic Ramp deck. So yes, this was a pretty obvious banning. We all knew it had to happen. There was no doubt at this point that Oko just had to go, where Standard was probably just going to straight up die. No one's going to play a metagame where one deck is 70% of the meta. So that's the reason why. It's as simple as that. The other cards were in the same colors. They were also 2-push, but really Oko was a reason for the banning. So what happened next? And what happened next is a little bit confusing. So we had Theros Beyond Death, which kind of came and went. Yes, it unleashed Uro into the multiverse, but it was a relatively decent set. We were dealing with Wilderness Rex and Fires of Inventions, but Standard was like okay for a little bit. The big change, though, came with Ikoria. Ikoria gave us Luca, which pushed Fires of Invention into unheard of heights. It also gave us the weirdest time in his Standard's history, which is Companions released and just changed Magic altogether. Every deck essentially was a companion deck in every format. We had never in the history of Magic seen a mechanic that was that broken, that was that played, that changed the game so much. So in June of 2020, we got Fires of Invention banned. We got Agent of Treachery banned, related to being the best deck in the format. Along with Luca, the deck became really, really strong. Agent of Treachery also gets hit by Winota, so it was like the number one played creature in Standard, even though it's a 7-drop, which is insane. And even though not technically a banning, Wizards took the unprecedented step of errata-ing companions to make them more expensive. So why did this happen? And the answer is really, Fires again became broken. Top deck of the format. Companions changed Magic altogether. What happened after these bannings? Did it fix Standard? Not really. We went from Fires of Invention being a huge percentage of the meta and Companions being everywhere to Companions being kind of fringe pieces and Wilderness Wreck being 50% of the meta. So we went from one broken 4-mana, mana doubling enchantment into another one without much changes. There was a Mythic Championship, I want to say, or there's so many weird events these days. It's hard to keep up on, but it was hitting 50% of the meta at Pro Tour events, which of course leads us to our most recent round of bannings. In August of 2020, so just a month ago now, 2 months ago, we got Teferi, Wilderness Wreck, Growth Spiral, and also Cauldron Familiar banned. So why were these cards banned? People hated them. They were dominating Standard. However, it's worth mentioning that with Teferi, Wilderness Wreck, and Growth Spiral, these cards were all rotating in just over a month anyway. So in some sense, it was kind of a free roll ban. They were really kind of rotated earlier. However, Cauldron Familiar is a more unique piece in that it would have survived rotation. The sacrifice decks were really good. We also got a little note on Arena and how clunky it was to play Cauldron Familiar. While I don't think Cauldron Familiar was banned just because it was clunky on Arena, that definitely played into it. That was another vote against keeping it in the format. But really, it was part of the best deck in the format. It was really obnoxious to play against in paper and on Arena, so it had to go, and that was the one non-rotating card that got banned in the August bannings. So what happened next after these bannings? We had rotation, and just this week, we're getting more bannings. Wizards already posted the announcement saying we're getting bannings next week. We went through rotation, ended up with a deck immediately jumping out at like 40-50% of the meta with the Uro, Omnath, Locust, Cobra ramp deck. So Standard arguably went through rotation, and it definitely didn't get better. Is it worse? It's hard to know these days. Like, Standard is consistently in such a bad spot that it's hard to really know if it got worse. So the bottom line with all this is, it's really difficult to have any faith that future bannings are going to fix Standard based on the past 4 years of bannings. Outside of that one period for like 18 months after the last energy banning where Standard was pretty decent, there honestly haven't been any bannings that I would consider to have fixed Standard. Some of them might improve Standard slightly for a little bit. Some of them have done essentially nothing, like Field of the Dead getting banned arguably made Standard even worse as we went from 2 decks to 1 deck that were playable in the meta. But really, there's a pretty consistent history here, at least for the past 4 years, that bannings just don't really improve the format any meaningful amount. So when we get the BNR announcement tomorrow, it's going to be exciting. I'm hyped to try new Standard and see maybe this banning will be different. Maybe the bannings we get this week will be more like the energy bannings, and we go back to Standard being good for a while. Like, sooner or later, that's likely to happen, almost by accident in the law of averages. But it's really hard to have faith that a banning is going to fix Standard because our past bannings have not fixed Standard. If anything, they might slightly improve Standard for a short period of time, but Standard's issues are bigger than banning. Standard issues, in my opinion, are things like London Mulligans, things like the Fire era card design, where Wizards are just pushing things really, really far. Things like Hasbro wanting to double Wizards' profits, probably pushing Wizards to take more risks than they would normally take to try to keep that money rolling in. So Standard's issues, unfortunately, are not like, okay, we got one broken thing, we ban it, and then things get better, like they have been in the past. Like, oh, Callblade is too good at dominating the format, let's get rid of that deck, and now things are going back to normal. We're not really in that kind of place at the moment. So while I'm holding out hope that maybe tomorrow's bannings will actually fix the Standard format, if history, at least for the past 4 years, is our guide, most Standard bannings don't do much of anything, and some of them actually make the format worse rather than better. So I don't know. What do you think about Standard? What can be done? How can it be improved? It is a super important format to Magic itself, especially in the era of Arena where it's the primary format, the only real format, quote unquote, because Historic's not played in paper on Magic Online on the client. So Standard is super important, but what do we do? Like, what can be done to save Standard? What is Standard's pathway forward? Is there a way that this can go back to normal, or is this the new normal where we're just gonna have to deal with bannings? It's really shocking if you discount that 18-month period where things were pretty peaceful between the last energy banning and last October when Field of the Dead got banned. If you take that out of the last 4 years, we've been getting an average of almost a ban every other month, which is absolutely insane for 4 straight years outside of that 18-month period. So this has been a problem for a long time. I don't know what to do. My hopes are not super high, but if you got some ideas, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope this was informational, entertaining, some combination of those things. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.